All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And let's get back into the purpose of being here today, which is starting the school year off right with TCI. You're going to see how to navigate TCI, how to teach with TCI, and how to assign, assess, and grade with TCI. So the first thing I want to show you is let's take a look at these different iconic images for our elementary program for California. You see the Social Studies Alive, Me and My World, that's our kindergarten program. My School and Family is first grade. My Community, second grade. So you'll see we're opening up their world for them. Then we have Social Studies Alive, California's Communities for third grade. And Social Studies Alive, California's Promise for fourth, and then finally America's Past for our fifth grade curriculum. So really, what makes TCI TCI? Well, the company was created over 30 years ago by Dr. Bert Bauer and Jim Lundell. And Kelly Shafsky was, as we like to say, along for the ride. He was fantastic. It was quite the dynamic trio. And they really felt like they wanted to make a difference in the world of social studies education. So they did some research on their own. They were working with Bert Bauer was working with some graduate students at Stanford University. And he wanted to get away from the sit and get that social studies had become known for, that note-taking, kind of that head down on the desk with the textbook open type of social studies classroom. That was what was considered to be traditional. And they decided that they needed to make it more engaging. So what you'll find with TCI are engaging activities. Also, we want to make sure that we are integrating our ELA learning as well. So that's why you'll find with TCI, our reading and writing is embedded and incorporated in what we would say intertwined with our engaging activities. And we also want to make sure that it's easy to use, not just for the teachers, but for the students. We want to make sure we're scaffolding each lesson in such a way that it's driven by inquiry and every student can find a pathway to success to master the concepts that are being taught. We have 6 different teaching strategies within all of our curriculum levels of TCI. The first one, the visual discovery, puts a visual in front of the students, and that becomes what we would call the sage on the stage. It's the focal point of the lesson. The teacher then becomes the guide on the side and facilitates students through the learning. They will focus on an image and dive into it and ask lots of questions about the image. And then we will turn into the content, read about the image, and then we jump back into the image and what we call a dramatic acted out. And students will take on a role in the image and make it come to life for everyone. So with that explanation, you should be able to visualize how we are tapping into all those different multiple intelligences that are within our classroom walls. The second one is an experiential exercise, and that's one of the strategies I'm going to highlight for you today. In the experiential exercise, students take on the role of something in society that's happened in the past or something we want them to experience themselves. And then we make that transition into our academic content and how that looked in society or how that can look moving forward. So they experience what that would feel like. In our Writing for Understanding strategy, we teach writing with the content, through the content. It's really learning through writing in the social studies field. We give them rich experiences that then they can write about and guide them every step of the way. Our response group strategy takes big questions and thoughtful, provocative concepts, and we break them down into small groups of 3, and we allow them to discuss these concepts within their group of 3, and then we rotate the role of the presenter when sharing to the large group. Problem-solving problem-solving group work is probably pretty similar to what you've done in the past when you put kids in groups to work. The difference is that TCI assigns specific roles and specific jobs for each role so that the students can be successful. And that way you don't have one student taking over the entire project for all of them. They have to work interdependently. And then finally, a social studies skill builder, where we take content and we marry it with skills. So for example, when we work on map skills, we want to make sure that we're using a map related to the content that we're teaching. Or if we're teaching the skill of how to read bar graphs, then we are matching that with social studies content. For example, in a Civil War lesson, we might look at resources that the North had versus what the South had in that area. And what you'll find, and what makes TCI different from other companies, is that we look at a standard or a concept in social studies, and we think which of these strategies would be most effective in teaching that concept or that content or that standard. And that's where the core of the lesson is. All of this is embedded in your TCI curriculum and is easy to implement. So what does this look like in the classroom? Well, I'm going to go through a couple of images with you so you can see what a classroom would look like during a TCI lesson. This one in particular, communication and cooperation are the key to getting along and working together as a team. And you'll see the kids are sitting knee to knee. So there's probably some sort of dialogue that's taking place within these students because they're sitting face to face, and then they also have shoulder partners. This is a problem-solving group work activity in which they were designing and creating neighborhoods full of buildings, outer places, and people. This lesson has to do with human monuments that honor ordinary citizens who accomplished extraordinary things. And this one in particular had to do with Ruby Bridges and Lois Marie Gibbs, who taught us what it means to help your community grow and improve. So you'll see that they are presenting with student presence and showing authentic work that was created by the group. This lesson is one of my absolute favorites. It's from the 5th grade curriculum. Having fun simulating a deep sea dive full of artifacts from an expedition by European explorers. So in this lesson, 5th grade students are learning why Europeans explored and came over to the New World. And you'll see that the teacher has taken what appears to be a simple shower curtain lining and marked off with tape different parts of a boat. And then what you see in the middle, the picture cards are there to go with the lesson. And they are primary sources that the students will use to investigate more. This is still going into that simulation on the European explorers. You'll see that this picture card that's right here in front of them, that's what they got out of the boat. They've brought it back to their table and they're working together to complete these graphically organized reading notes. And I'm going to show you what those look like. A completed version is right here. It's from lesson 4, How and Why Europeans Came to the New World. And what you'll notice about these reading notes are that they are graphically organized around this ship that the students explored in their classroom. So that's going to have more meaning to them. They're chunked into specific sections that they've read in the textbook that go with the picture cards that they've used in the lesson. And the idea behind me showing you this is that you may teach 2nd or 3rd or 4th or 1st, but every level of our curriculum has graphically organized reading notes that tie into the activity that we're doing in our classroom. So the reading and writing support the activity, and the activity also then supports the meaningful understanding of our social studies concepts. This one in particular is from 1st grade. How are families special? And over here in the side, you'll see that it's a processing. So in our lessons, we have an activity that we do at the end of the lesson called processing. And it's when students give us back the information in an authentic way that makes it more meaningful and also shows the teacher what they learned throughout the lesson. So in this lesson, they learn why families are special and how each family can be a little bit different. And then in the processing activity for this, the student individually responds why their family is special, and then they draw a picture of their family. And so here are some of the examples that they came up with. This lesson is from the 5th grade curriculum as well. This is Tug of War, an experiential exercise where they take on the roles of Britain or the US Patriots. Well, I guess they would have just been the colonist patriots at the time. And they play a game of tug of war to see who will win. And they find out in this game of tug of war why the American colonists were able to win. The teacher's going to introduce new rules within the game to give the blue team an advantage over the red team. And that is the heart of a TCI classroom. The beautiful part about TCI is that it truly is Teachers Curriculum Institute. It's a curriculum that's created by teachers, for teachers, keeping our students in mind and what works best for them. So whenever you open up a TCI lesson, you will see engaging strategies that tap into multiple intelligences, student-centered activities, and an easy-to-use teacher guidebook that allows you to facilitate the lesson in a way to help every child be successful. And so that's where we are going to be headed. The components of our program. When you look at this image, you're going to see a simple picture of different items, and that's because everything's been embedded in the curriculum for you. So your students will have a print textbook, a print interactive student notebook for those graphically organized reading notes. You have picture cards to help you facilitate the lesson, just like you saw in the sunken ship activity. A print lesson guide that gives you step-by-step instructions on how to run the lesson, the questions to ask that also correlates 100% to the presentation in your teacher account. Also, the students have digital access as well. And it is also available in Spanish. We definitely want to make sure that when you are using TCI, we have you covered. Within the curriculum, you find skills and toolkits to help you can make those connections with ELA and with citizenship. We have read and do videos that you can use in place of the lessons that are already there in place for you. We have pacing guides that are going to help you pace out your lessons through the school year. And within each lesson, we give you an estimate of how long that particular aspect of the lesson will take so that you can plan based around that. For those of you who have, say, 2 30-minute social studies classes a week, you'll be able to easily use the program to make sure that it fits in. And hopefully, or luckily, if you have more, then you'll be able to do even more with that time. We have a biography bank with important historical figures that have made a difference in our society. And then finally, hands-on activities for our students to use. I mentioned the read and do, and the read and do is a separate activity that students can do in place of the lesson that's also there that can be found in the textbook. We want to make sure, though, that if we have the read and do and have our students work through that, that we can still hold them accountable and grade or assess them based on that. So we have a writing assignment that goes with the read and do as well. We have checks for understanding in our student textbook. It's a place where students can go to check to see, did I get what I needed to out of that reading content? And so this is truly a safe place for them to, as simple as it sounds, check their understanding. We have a processing activity like the one you saw in my student and family that allows students to show us what they learned and the level of mastery for each of the content concepts we've covered. And I say the word authentic because it truly is. It's individual, and they're going to give us, based on a skeleton structure, what they got out of the lesson. Lesson games are a fun way for students to make sure that they understand the content that they've learned. They really are reading comprehension questions, but putting them in a game-like atmosphere allows every student to enjoy them. And I can tell you that when I assign a lesson game, it's like one of the few things as a classroom teacher that 100% of my students will do each and every time. And finally, we have vocabulary cards. The vocabulary cards are very helpful. They're kind of like the old school cards that we used to make when we were younger, except now these are digital and part of the student subscription. You've heard me use the word lesson a lot. And normally, when we plan a day, we think, what is today's lesson? But TCI thinks of a lesson structure and a much larger picture than that. So we have a comprehensive lesson cycle that brings in all of these amazing teaching theories into each lesson. So when you hear about a lesson in TCI, if you were to think of that as per se a chapter, that would probably be more helpful in understanding or wrapping your head around how long it will take to teach a lesson in TCI. With that being said, we have lots of options for you. We have flexible lesson options. For those of you that want to go through the reading and do the reading notes only, there's an option there for you. For those of you that want to do the classroom activity slideshow, that also has the reading embedded in it, and you can choose to stick with just the activity or combine the reading within the activity. I mentioned earlier the read and do. A place to share, for example, is this one. We're going to be looking at this example a little bit later today, but it's just an alternative to the TCI lesson that is in the traditional textbook. And you'll see that you can still hold your students accountable for learning. For those of us who want to dive deeper into the lesson and the content, we have options for you. We have literature recommendations for you. We have things to explore. And we also have primary sources that you can investigate to work with your students. There are some videos in there. There are some online resources that are there for your students to use. And then we also have the lesson game that you saw earlier, and then our assessments. We need to assess our students. And you'll see with TCI, there are plenty of checkpoints to assess them along the way. We also have what would be considered traditional, formative, and summative assessments. So we'll be taking a brief look at that today as well. So with that being said, let's go live. And the lesson that I've chosen to highlight today is one of my absolute favorites, because even though, let me get out of this part, even though it is, even though this lesson is, let me get back into even though it's a first grade lesson, you can, go. All right. Even though this is a first grade lesson, anyone, regardless of what grade you teach, can incorporate some of the similarities in this lesson and what we do in the beginning of the school year. So what I did is I opened up this particular program, and you'll see that all of the things that are here, it says unit overview and the lessons that are in the unit. Let me take a step back though and show you what all of this would look like if I just open my program from the beginning. And with that, you'll see it opens up to a program content page. Everything in here is in the entire program for that grade level. So over here, in the purple toolbar, it says program. If I go to support, the ideas that are here, the things I mentioned earlier about the ELA toolkit and skills, assessment strategies, pacing guide, I mentioned that earlier. These items are here to help you with the entire program. So if it's under program, it's for the whole program for the whole year. If I want to look just specifically at a unit, I click on unit overview, and up here I can change which unit I'm looking at. Right now I'm in unit 1, and I see that this has everything I could need to make my unit come alive for my students. I mentioned that I'm going to get into how do we get along in school, or the lesson that I think can be used in any social studies classroom. So let's take a look at this. Up at the top, it has our essential question, how do we get along in school? And then in the overview, you'll see that it gives us little time chunks. It tells us for the preview, which is the very beginning of our lesson, the hook, how long it will take us to run the preview in our classroom. The activity, which I'll take you through, obviously we're going to be fast forwarding through it, 70 minutes. So I mentioned earlier, if you have 2 blocks of 30 minutes for social studies a week, then you can think to yourself, how can I pare that down to maybe 30 minutes for one day and 30 minutes for the other? I'm sure there's a way to shave off a few minutes there. The read and do, remember, that's the alternative to the activity, and that is at 35 minutes. And then we think that the processing will take about 30 minutes for your students. Now, keep in mind, you may be thinking, well, what about the reading? Well, the reading is intertwined with the activity. So it's to be done with the activity during the activity. And while we go through this, I think you'll feel more comfortable regardless of what grade level you're teaching, because you'll see how it's there to support the content, not stand alone and be done completely separately, unless you feel like that particular option is best for your students. Well, what materials am I going to need for this lesson? And you'll see that it gives us a list of materials that will be needed. What am I going to have to do as a teacher before the lesson? This is I joke around about how this is my Sunday night list, because usually Sunday night, as my husband's turning on Sunday Night Football, I'm scrolling on my phone or computer to see, like, okay, Amy, what is it I need to make sure that I'm ready for the next day or two? Differentiating instruction. Now we're within the lesson. So all of these differentiating instruction tips are lesson specific. The program support is for the whole program for the year. The differentiating instruction within the lesson gives you lesson specific tips to help the students for that lesson. And you'll see we tackle 4 different types of students: our English learners, students with special needs, learners reading and writing below grade level, and our advanced learners. How can we enhance the learning? We offer additional reading opportunities, websites, online resources to help this lesson become even more meaningful. And it's very helpful for your families who want to know or ask that question, how can they support social studies in their homes? These are great suggestions for them. Well, I'm going to collapse the planning, and I'm going to show you what these different lesson options look like. You'll see just the reading, the classroom activity with the reading, or just the read and do. And then some of our diving deepers are down here, and then how we can assess the lesson is down here. So let's jump in. I'm going to go right into this classroom lesson, how do we get along in school? And you're going to see something very interesting when I click the next few slides. You'll see that the planning and overview are also within the lesson presentation with the timing. So we have them in a couple of different places. And now we're ready to begin. How do we get along in school? We're going to listen to this story.
2 Goats on a Bridge, a Russian folk tale. Once, two goats met in the middle of a narrow bridge. The bridge was far too narrow for them to pass. "Get out of my way," said one goat. "I want to cross this bridge." "No, you get out of my way," said the other goat. "I am crossing the bridge. I started first." Neither goat would back up, but neither goat could go forward either.
We're at a standoff. Now, I mentioned different ways to use this in, say, a third grade classroom. Well, let's look at something we see here. You can look at the nonverbals of the goat, and you could find other images that your students might find more interesting at different grade levels. But looking at the nonverbals of these goats, you'll see that they are needing to be more cooperative in their approach. And so something like that could be useful at the older grade level. Also, let's stop. What's happening? What's the problem? For those of you that would need a little extra support with that, we have our answers on a click. So then we want our students to make a prediction. We're going to tell them these two goats cannot pass on the bridge. What will happen next? Draw your ideas. So I'm going to ask you all in the question and answer. What do you think is going to happen next? What is going to happen next? What do you think these goats are going to do? I worked with a group of teachers earlier. We went through this exact same lesson, and just like, yeah, Mrs. Bishop, I think you might have the correct answer. They're both going to fall off. But one of the things that I love about the TCI curriculum is that when you give something like this, they get to tell you what they think is going to happen. And it gives you a little insight into their personalities and who they are and how they view things. Some people are going to say, "Oh, I'm scared they're going to fall off." Some people are going to be like, "They're going to fall off. They're going to fight." Others will be like, "Oh, no. I'm sure they'll find a way to share the bridge and get past each other." And just like I worked with teachers earlier today, they said the same thing. I had a variety of responses. And I told them that's what you're going to have in your classroom as well. And then if we have time for them to share their ideas, it's a great piece. So just to cut through the chase here, basically what's going to happen is these goats are not going to solve their problem cooperatively. The story goes on. All of these things are here on a click, by the way. So when you're working with your TCI curriculum and your presentation, all of these things are here for you to use to facilitate your lesson and make it easier. But basically, these goats fight and they fall into the water and they both get up and they're very angry. And then we want to build that bridge into the academic part of why we have this preview. In what other ways could they have solved their problem? They could have worked together. So with that being said, here we go. Cooperation means getting along in a way that is fair to everyone. It means working together. Did they cooperate? How could they cooperate in a way that is fair to both of them? So there's that short bridge from the preview to now getting into the academics. We're going to complete an experiential exercise, phase 1, which is 2 on a task. So I'm just going to talk you through this and let you know what this would look like in a classroom, and imagine this for yourself. Your students are going to sit with a partner, and each pair gets 1 sheet of paper and 1 crayon. Then the students have to close their eyes and think of a picture they want to draw. They have to think about it. They're not talking or using their words. Do not tell your partner. So here are the rules. They're going to work with their partner to draw a picture. They're going to keep one hand on the crayon at all times, and they are not allowed to talk. So we're going to give them 2 minutes to draw a picture. I've done this with a variety of age groups, and their emotions sometimes get really high if they become anxious or frustrated at how their picture looks, and you'll see what TCI can do to alleviate that and bring them back down. So they're drawing their picture, they're not allowed to talk, and then we debrief it. We want to make sure we have a cooperative, tolerant classroom, and we need to be fair to their emotions as well. So that SEL component, how did you feel drawing that way? And you'll notice that I don't have to click the plus sign for that. I don't need to tell them what to feel. I can leave that plus sign there and let them tell me. Were you able to draw the picture you imagined? Well, for some groups, it might have been one person who was, like mandating the picture, and the other student was more passive. What made it hard? What do you think we could do to make it better? And so we're leading them to the idea of cooperation is winning. So we're going to give each pair a new sheet of paper, and we're going to play the game now, but with different rules. And the new rules are: work with your partner to draw a picture, keep one hand on the crayon at all times, and this time they're allowed to talk. We still give them 2 minutes. But what you're going to find is that when you debrief this with them, their social emotional well-being, they're going to have a better experience because they will have talked about it. Now, you may have those outliers that still feel like their picture and the way they wanted it to look isn't what they wanted it to be, but that's why this debrief part is here, to help us bring them down and resolve any conflict or anxiety that occurred. Cooperating is one of your responsibilities as a student in this classroom. So now we're going to keep this concrete, and they're going to look at an image that is reflective of what their recess time may look like in your classroom. So ways to get along, what details, what place, what do you see them sharing, and which children are cooperating. Then we jump into the student text. Remember, the student text is intertwined with the lesson activity. And you'll see that this student text, I'm just going to show you a couple of features about it. If I go to the section, I can highlight which section I want. So you'll see the titles. And basically in this chapter on how we get along, we talk about sharing, talking, listening, taking turns, playing fairly, being a good sport. I know several people who could use that even as adults in society, quite frankly. And the read and do is also here as well. We'll get to that in a few minutes. I do want to highlight a couple of things though. I'm going to go to the next section. In our student text that's online, regardless of which grade level you're working with, there are many similarities. And one of them is if we hit play, it will read it to the student.
1. We share. We get along by sharing. We often want to do the same things as others. When we share.
Okay, so that is one of our ways we can level the playing field for the students who need that extra support to gain the content. Also, you'll see that if I click on the vocabulary word, it gives me a picture with a description. We share things in school. We have a highlighter tool. And our highlighter tool, we can use different colors and we can highlight different things. And I'm just randomly selecting things to use. Students have an option to put notes in their work, and we can share it through Google Drive. You'll notice that one thing I haven't done yet is I haven't clicked the main ideas. When we click the main ideas, regardless of what program you're working in, they are in bold blue. Now I'm going to go through to the next section until I get to the writing part that goes with this particular part. And remember that we are still in phase 2, which is that image. So now I'm going to come to the end of section 4, and this would be what is in students' interactive student notebook. Circle 2 ways we share in red. Circle 2 ways we talk in blue. Circle 2 ways we listen in green, and 2 ways we take turns in purple. I also want to point out that if you would like, you can come over to you can come back to this lesson and put this on the big screen, and you could have students point it out to others. You can assign them different ideas, like maybe a small group comes up with the ways to share, ways to talk, listen, cooperate, and have them do it that way. So there's some flexibility in there that I think is pretty cool. And now we have a song about getting along in school. I'll just give you a small taste of this, and then we're going to move on past it.
How can we get along, get along, get along? How can we get along in school? I can share my things.
And it's quite sticky, by the way. You and your students will be singing that for hours after. But then we want them to think about that song and how many ways we can get along. And then we want to review. So what do you share with your friends? Why is it important to share? And then again, we find this picture in our notebook to color in, find what we're looking at. And then we get to, this just chunks it out even more if you wanted to go that route. Let me fast forward through that just a little bit. We get through to the part where we want them to process what they've learned and show us what they've learned. So when do you play fairly, and how are you a good sport? That could be something you hang by the door when you go out to recess. That would be a great reminder for them to play cooperatively and be a good sport. And now let's take a look at the read and do. So I mentioned the read and do earlier, and just to save some time, basically the read and do for this is, let me take one step back here and look through here. Okay, so the read and do has to do with how a group of people can share the same space. So I'll let this play out for the beginning.
Read and do, a place to share. Neighbors wanted different things. They had to work it out. How do people share in a city? Maya and her family just moved to the city. They live in an apartment. They do not have a yard. Maya's grandma loves to garden. She gave up her garden when they moved. Where could she have a garden in the city?
So the story goes on about how grandma decides she wants to contact a city council member and have the space be used as a garden. And another group would like to put basketball courts up for the children to play on. And it turns out they were able to do both in a shared space. And so that read and do then turns into them sequencing the events of the story to hold them accountable for it. And that can be done in place of the lesson that I highlighted for you. So that's what that looks like. I mentioned earlier that we have assessments that go with each lesson. And so for here, the lesson assessment, the lesson game is a picture maker. So students will click on, and that is, I'm just gonna turn in what I know is an incorrect answer, and it'll tell me that I can go again. So why do we share? To do things together. Correct, I got it right. Now you'll notice too that I can have it read it to me.
Why do we share? A. To be left alone. B. To do things together. C. To keep things to ourselves. D. To start fights with other students.
And then finally, it reveals a picture and they get to answer a question based on the picture that they see. There are different lesson games within the curriculum. So that one is a picture maker, but you may find one that, let me find, what was school like long ago? This one is a different type of game. They're all have the same idea though, holding them accountable for the reading and the content that was taught. Moving into the lesson as well, let me find what I was looking for here. I apologize. There we go. Okay, so the other type of assessment that we can give is what we call a traditional assessment. And so just to show you what TCI has for that assessment, let me match up my lesson for that. How do we get along in school? All right, so let's say I want to just print the traditional assessment for my students, or I want to assign it to them online. That is also an option. And you'll see that we have big ideas. And then a read and do, social studies skills, and then a show what you know. So we have different levels of depth of understanding in our tests. And since this is, I believe, lesson 1 of grade 1, you'll notice that the level of it would be appropriate for them. Also, if you give the assessment digitally, then it can read it to them as well. So that is the entire lesson cycle that we went through. And let me find what we gained out of this. So let's go into navigating some of our TCI resources in the last 12 minutes that we have together. So much is here for you. And I think the biggest trick as a classroom teacher in using TCI is just keeping an open mind that there's so much more there that I could ever need, and knowing and understanding that I'm still the one who's responsible for the students in my classroom. So when you look at your program content, just to remind you that the things that are in program are there to support you for the program, the year-long curriculum. And because most of you are 3rd grade, let me jump into the 3rd grade California's communities and show you what your page looks like. So if I click explore this page, it's going to help highlight some of the things like, and this is another item that I really want to take you through is unit projects. We have unit openers and closers. So we can go into an introduction of a unit and tell students what they're going to learn and what they're going to expect from the unit. So this one has to do with geography of the local region. And then, and also if I clicked present slides, that would have been an option as well. It's also going to show me how I can dive in. I can explore an entire unit to see the video libraries, lessons, and more. So let's dive into this first unit in 3rd grade. And you'll see that we have videos that are going to be coming soon for you, as well as games. You're going to be able to see every game in one place. And then the biographies that I mentioned earlier in the civics. I'm going to click on the civics because this part really has been in the forefront of TCI for some time now. When you click on the citizenship, there are so many components in here to help you. Now, I do want you to know that there are a ton of citizenship ideals, skills, concepts embedded into every TCI curriculum that we've created. We also have taken some particular pieces out to then, or just highlight them, not take them out, but to highlight them. So when we talk about integrating civics in elementary classrooms, for example, what does that look like? Well, we're going to have different things in here. For example, if we want to touch on the visual and performing, create paintings, drawings, sculptures, photography projects. And then we go into the particular grade levels and what is in there for the standards. So looking at grade, if I scroll down, it'll take me to grade 3. You'll see how we align with that. And so that is in the forefront. We got that in the integrating civics in elementary classroom. Citizenship at school. What does it mean to be a good citizen at school? And here are reading pages that will help students be or identify ways that they can be a good citizen at school. Citizenship at home. And then this is pretty neat too. We have some major concepts like passing the 19th Amendment. And so what we've done is we've given a free lesson, and then this is the basic skeleton of the lesson, but you can adapt it to meet the needs of your students in your classroom. Also, I would like to say that if you join TCI's Facebook page on social media for Facebook, Twitter, they have lots of different ideas. They let you know about different webinars that are coming up, lots of additional free resources, free lessons. There's so much there that you can use to help you teach social studies in your classroom. So if you wanted to find this, you can go into the lesson once again. So here we are with the lesson overview. And it was right here in the library. Or you can find it in your purple toolbar. And if you click Civics Library in your purple toolbar, it will look the same. We also have a primary source library. So if you personally or your students need to know and want to know more about a particular item, that's a primary source. Here it is. Biographies, I mentioned those earlier. One thing I will point out is that the biographies are written at a Lexile level that may or may not be accessible for all of your students. And it does still need like a text to read function. So if you teach a lower level, then you might need to give them more support in the biographies because they're going to look the same K through 5. And then pacing guide. We give you in the pacing guide how many estimated minutes it will take to teach the lesson. Keep in mind that our lessons are an entire lesson cycle. It's not just one daily lesson. And then keep in mind too, that within the lesson overview, for example, understanding the geography of the world, we tell you how long we think the preview will take, how long it will take to do the activity that includes the reading, how long the processing activity will take, etc. So for example, you'll see that understanding the geography of the world, we estimate to take 205 minutes. Well, what does that look like in the lesson? So we said we thought it would take 205 minutes. And then what that looks like is this. So we think the preview will take 30 minutes, the activity 120 minutes, that embeds the reading, the 30 minutes for study in your community, the 30-minute read and do, and the processing at 25. So that's where that timing comes in. And then super important part that you have at your disposal are the correlations. We want to make sure that we're teaching the standards and that we're hitting them. And so when you click on the correlations button, I'm getting the circle of the I am thinking computer circle. Okay, so when we look at our standards, we want to make sure that we're teaching them. And one of the things you'll see is I can expand, and they just give me one particular assessment question and how that is going to meet the standards. But if I go into different ones, I need to be an assistant. See, I need a promotion to view that. That probably means that they're working on that as we speak. And my account goes through Colorado. So that's probably the other reason, even though it says California right here in the top, because for whatever reason, my particular teaching accounts with TCI go through Colorado, even though I live in Tampa. Don't ask me why. That very well could be why. But here's another example where the assessments, if I click on it, it'll show me the questions, what standards they meet in California, which is super helpful because Sometimes I think we get caught up as teachers in spending too much time on a particular standard, and then we skip a couple others that we think, oh my goodness, I needed to spend a little more time on that. And if you have this here for you, then you can see that you're meeting them and how you're meeting them and the ones you've met several times. And it also will help you plan your lessons. And then the very last thing I wanted to show you is the program dashboard. So when you open up your program and you click on the dashboard, anything the students have done digitally that they've turned in will show right here for you. You can click here to plan a lesson. You can click straight into reading the text, viewing assignments that you've assigned or to your students, which clearly I am without students in my 3rd grade California class, so that's why that's not there, but it would be. And then the very last component I want to show you is, I mentioned those assessments, and I showed you one at the 1st grade level, traditional TCI assessment. The last thing I'm going to do, it just takes 60 seconds to do this, is show you how you can create your own. I'm going to create my own test. I'm going to call this one demo so it can stand alone and not be confused with anything else. I'm going to go straight to those TCI questions, make sure that my lesson's selected, and let's say I want to add all of those to my test. But now I want to change a few of them. Maybe I want to put question 8 up here and this question down here. Or maybe I want to change a distractor. Or maybe I want to take that out completely and I want to create my own. All I have to do is come over to create question. And I can, even if I choose any of those options, I can add an image that can help my students. I can ask them a question about the image. I can share my creativity. So you'll notice if I come back to here, I can ask what all questions or other teachers only, what they've put into their tests. And the one thing that I will say is if you see an error, please go to info@teachtci.com and let the company know, because really we rely on each other to make sure that we are creating questions that are free of spelling and grammar errors or incorrect answers. But you'll see that I could also come here. Maybe teachers in my district have created a test, or other teachers have shared their entire test, but they're all there and they definitely add to our TCI community. So that brings me to covering everything we needed to cover and making sure that I support you with the information that you'll need. So Mrs. Bishop, this question, that was a good question. The lesson itself is just in the 1st grade lesson. However, you can take the concepts that we did for that, because were pretty similar, pretty simple, and then use that at different grade levels that you teach. And I do a version of this every year. I start off with some sort of little version of this, whether it's I'm teaching 5th graders or 6th graders or 7th graders. I always do something a little bit similar to that, because number one, they all end up laughing at the end. And they have a positive shared experience with the person they're with, even if the image looks different than what they anticipated it would look like. So, well, with that being said, I want to give you the very best advice that I've heard this summer from a teacher. And so now this will be coming from another teacher, is don't be too hard on yourself this school year. You've spent part of your summer here with us, and we appreciate and value you for that. We have gratitude for that. And be that special someone that these children can look up to help guide them through some challenging times in the world today. and don't be too hard on yourself. I think 99% of us go out there and really try our very best every day to make our students be the best version of themselves they could possibly be. So hopefully you'll find that TCI is supportive and helpful to that endeavor. And if there's anything you need, you go to info@teachtci.com, or you can follow us on social media, and you can find we have back to school webinars similar to the one today, self-paced PD courses. The Facebook teacher group's outstanding. We talk to each other and help each other out every step of the way. And I just think that if we can make our job a little easier, it's like using a dishwasher instead of washing your dishes by hand. That's probably the best analogy I can come up with. So thank you so much. I truly appreciate all of you joining me here today, and I am going to sign off. Have a great rest of your summer and a great start to your school year.